Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 51, Thomas Burnet, Book 7, Some Christian Students of the Kabalah, from the Doctrine and Literature of the Kabalah by Arthur Edward Waite. 14. Thomas Burnet. With the Cambridge School of Platonists, the name of Thomas Burnet, sometime master of the Charterhouse, connects by association rather than the similarity of intellectual pursuits. He entered Christ's College in 1654 when Ralph Cudworth was master, while Henry More was just in his 40th year. It was probably to the last named divine that he owed his slight knowledge of the subject which entitles him to mention in this place. The amicable discussion between More and the editor of the Kabalah Denudata appeared, as we have seen, in that work in the year 1677, but the interpretation of the mind of Moses had preceded it by a number of years. When Burnet published his Telluris Theoria Sacra, he gave no evidence of his interest in Platonic or Kabbalistic subjects. It has been described by Brewster as a beautiful geological romance. It is, of course, concerned largely with the Mosaic scheme of creation, and the more important work which followed it, dealing as it does with the ancient doctrine concerning the origin of things, is really its extension or sequel. In this interesting volume, written elegantly in Latin of the period, tout un grand chapitre, as the bibliography of Dr. Pappas describes it, is devoted to the Kabalah. As already hinted, it bears no evidence of original research or indeed of any first-hand knowledge, but it is justifiable by our purpose to ascertain how a literature which fascinated, though it did not altogether convince, the Cambridge Platonists, impressed the liberal mind of a bold and not unlearned thinker belonging to the next generation. We find, as might be anticipated, that Burnet raises no question as to the wisdom of Moses, by which he understood what all other Kabbalistic students have understood also, a knowledge of natural mysteries derived from the Egyptian education of the Jewish lawgiver. He differs, however, from the Kabbalist by questioning seriously how much of this wisdom came down to the Israelites. Assuming some tradition of the kind, there could be no doubt that it was depraved in the lapse of time. In particular, the Kabalah, as we now possess it, abounds in figments of imagination and in nugatory methods. From this statement of the general position, which may be regarded as the common ground of all criticism, he proceeds to a more detailed examination, with the specific results of which no sympathetic inquirer at the present day can reasonably quarrel. The debased character of the Jewish tradition is indeed, as already seen, admitted by those who most earnestly maintain its mystical and theosophical importance. If we attempt, says Burnet, to separate anything which may remain uncorrupted in the Kabalah, to divide the genuine from the spurious, we must first of all purge away that numerical, literal, grammatical part which seeks to extract arcane meanings from the alphabet, the divine names and the word book of the scriptures. The magical and superstitious element must also be purged away. We must further bear in mind, and this I think is the most sensible and necessary of all the secondary points raised in the criticism, that the enunciation of common notions in uncommon language cannot be accepted as the true Kabalah. The warning which it implies is not less needed at the present moment than in the days of Thomas Burnet. The delight in unintelligible language because it is unintelligible is as characteristic of some occult writers at the present day, even as of gloom-wrapped Hades according to the ritual of the dead, and it is a tendency which has an inscrutable foundation in the entire subject. It would seem indeed that the Sphinx who propounds the arcana in terms as monstrous as herself needs only a commonplace to overwhelm her, as in the case of Sidippus. In accordance with his intention, Burnet proceeds to divide the Kabalah into the nominal and real. The first is that which he has specified as worthless gematria, temura, notarikon, vocabula. Its devices, he says, are the diversions of our children, and in truth it would seem hard to decide whether intellectual superiority and philosophical seriousness should be ascribed to rabbinical anagrams or to the apparatus of tit-tat, too. In any case, they do not belong to sane literature, much less to wisdom. So far, we can accept very readily the judgment of Burnet, but destructive criticism is always comparatively easy, and there was no novelty in the line taken even so far back as the second half of the 17th century. When he comes, however, to consider what he has agreed to regard as the real Kabalah, his insufficiency is quite evident, and his slender knowledge, drawn only from the Kabalah denudata, when it does not arrest his judgment, leads him into manifest error. Thus he tells us that the real Kabalah contains two things which are important for our consideration, the doctrine of the Sephiroth and that of the four worlds, but he complains that the conception which underlies the former does not appear clearly. With the help of the lexicon of Rosenroth, he decides finally that they are emanations from God. He sets forth what he can glean from that source concerning Kether and Chokmah, and then surrenders the inquiry in the hope of finding more intelligible statements concerning the four worlds. He concludes, however, that the condemnation of all the pseudo-mystics of Kabbalism, Theosophy, and Hermetics is that of the unbelievers who continued to love the darkness rather than the light when the light was come already into the world. He assumes, as might be expected, that the Book of Occultation is the most important part of the Zohar, and glancing at the commentaries of Isaac de Loria and of Hertz on the tract in question and its developments, confesses his inability to understand either from text or interpreters what is meant by the symbolism of the vast and the lesser countenance. We are all of us liable some time or other to be distracted by reasoning, but it is a common complaint of the mind among Orientals to be distracted by allegories. To sum the general position, we know from Maimonides that the Hebrews once possessed many mysteries concerning things divine, but that they have perished. It is at the same time scarcely possible that all foundations should be wanting to the Kabalah. Yet if its doctrines were openly and clearly set forth, it is hard to say whether they would move us to laughter or astonishment. Thomas Burnet has higher claims to consideration than his ability as a critic of Kabbalism. He had perhaps few qualifications from which he might be expected to understand or sympathize with the aspirations embraced by Theosophy. He was one of the rare precursors of liberal theology, and he is said to have closed the path of his promotion by venturing to express the opinion that the story of the Garden of Eden should not be understood literally. In a later treatise on the faith and duties of Christians, he is also stated to have excluded so much that seemed to him doubtful or unimportant in accepted doctrine that it is questionable whether even Christianity remained. A posthumous work on eschatology and the resurrection maintained that the punishment of the wicked would terminate ultimately in their salvation. I should add that some pretended English versions of the archaeological philosophy do not represent the original, and in particular omit altogether the Kabbalistic section. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.